Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rajan Pereira. Manufacturing in 2017 contributed only about 16% to India's GDP, stagnating since economic reforms began in 1991. By contrast, in East and Southeast Asia, the industry share has exceeded 30 to 40%, while manufacturing is up 20 to 30%. India's manufacturing share of GDP has not moved up at all, though between 2004 and 2012, manufacturing employment growth was reasonable. However, total manufacturing employment has fallen significantly between 2011 and 2016 by 10 million in just 4 years, especially in labor-intensive manufacturing sector. Now, this is the opposite of what was achieved in Japan, Korea, Taiwan and China. By contrast, in India, the labor-intensive manufacturing sectors like food processing, tobacco, textiles, apparel, leather, wood and furniture have seen a decline since 2012. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze what the focus of the new government should be on manufacturing. Joining me on the program today are Dr. Arvind Virmani, former Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India, Shishir Sinha, Senior Deputy Editor of the Hindu Business Line, and Dilip Chinoy, Secretary General, FICCI. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Dr. Virmani, I'd like to begin the program with you. Let's talk about manufacturing now. It's been a problem area really as far as India is concerned, whereas, our fellow countries in the region have done extremely well, be it China, Japan, South Korea and so on and so forth. What's the problem as far as manufacturing is concerned and what should our focus be going forward?
So traditionally, the issue has been that we put in place in the 1960s some of the most advanced, if you want to call it, labor laws in the world actually, and we thought we were doing this to help labor. But one of the unfortunate consequences of this has been that the labor employment system became so rigid over time. People kept adding things to that, that really it becomes virtually impossible to fire anybody. So and then on top of that, people, you will also talk about the cost of labor, etc. But the most fundamental has been that it's like once you hire somebody, it's like lifetime employment, and competitive business cannot function. Monopolies can function on that. So really that is the fundamental problem. Now there are I want to mention one more. In electronics, for example, we could have still done this, but we signed this IT Zero agreement in which many final products tariffs were reduced to zero, while many things which go into it remained at whatever the was, which can be up to 10% now. It used to be much higher. So I think these two are the kind of long time standing things, but of course there are many other points which we can take up.
Absolutely. All right. So labor reforms is something that you're talking about. Dilip Chinoy, as far as policies are concerned, as far as labor reforms are concerned, what needs to be done on that front, do you think, and what should the focus be in the first 100 days of this new government?
So on the labor reform particularly, what had been done in the past is the 4 labor codes had been developed. I mean, if those labor codes are taken forward and legislated into action in the first 100 days, they will really address many of the issues that Arvind just talked about. So I think the agenda is already there. They have developed 3 of them. The industrial relations bit has not yet been developed, but we need to take those 4 labor codes as developed earlier and legislate them into action as quickly as possible. And I think there are 2 other areas which the previous government had introduced. One is the amendment of the Contract Labour Act. We need some clarity there about what size it is applicable to and what needs to be done. And the other, which was to allow fixed term employment, and that has to be taken forward. So what needs to be done is known. We just have to get ahead and do it.
Okay, we just have to get ahead and do it is what the panelist is suggesting. Shishir Sinha, I'd like to bring you into the picture now. As far as manufacturing is concerned, what about improvement of the infrastructure efficiency? I mean, that too should take place, isn't it?
Certainly, and before that, before answering to that particular point, I would just like to take forward what Dr. Bhimani has said. There is one particular problem. We are not just facing investment crisis, we are also facing consumption crisis. Consumption is low, investment is low. So that is creating some kind of viral impact on the manufacturing sector. They are not using their capacity. The capacity utilization is much more low because the consumption is very low. So we are having twin deficit kind of thing. Earlier we used to talk about twin deficit in terms of banks and corporates. Now we are talking about twin deficit when we are consumption demand as well as the investment demand. Now coming to your particular point, the infrastructure thing. See, infrastructure is the most critical key. I mean, if you want to have a better manufacturing thing, if you want to have overall better industrial scenario, without proper infrastructure, it cannot be done. And I believe the most important point in this government is that it is in the continuity. You don't need to change drastically what the previous government has done. So foundation has been laid. Now you just have to improve upon that. Talking about the infrastructure in particular, I will take waterways in as an example. This government, UPA 1, or rather I say, I'm sorry, NDA 2. NDA 2 because NDA 1 was under Mr. Vajpayee, so it's the NDA 2. So NDA 2 did a lot of work on the waterways, and that brought down the cost of transporting goods. Even I can remember one of the most popular beverage company started using waterways for taking their product from one point to other point, and it lowered their cost of production overall cost by 10 to 15%. So if there is more emphasis on such innovation, that will really help the industries to bring down the cost, and ultimately if the cost is lowered, then the consumer will get the benefit.
Certainly, certainly. Dr. Bhimani, you know, yeah, go ahead.
So there are a whole bunch of general things which apply to both labor intensive and other types of manufacturing. So we started with labor intensive, but you know, so the key one for labor intensive exports which must be mentioned is what is maybe called cross-border EODB. You know, we talk about general ease of doing business, but the cross-border stuff has actually not moved. You know, we had this 50-point increase in rank, etc. But the EODB relating to cross-border trade barely moved by a couple of ranks. So a special focus has to be on this whole issue of how to bring supply chains. And I'd like to discuss that further later, but let me answer your specific question. What was,
No, I basically wanted to speak about, you know, the public sector playing a huge role really as far as manufacturing is concerned. Should we now think of a time when we, you know, start going into privatization as far as our core sectors are concerned?
See, most of the competitive manufacturing sectors of the kind where we expect labor intensive manufacturing or labor intensive exports are already private. So you really have to think of what I just mentioned, which is more the control stuff really needs, you know, we have to constantly look at it, because we don't realize how much that license permit quota Raj went deep into it. You know, it's only when the big things have been removed then people start saying, for example, this Contract Labor Act and the fixed term employment. What I have heard from some business people is not enough, that fixed term helps, and you would think that would solve the problem, but they say that if we are going to establish a whole new supply chain for external people, that is not enough, you know, because every time you will be doing 1-year contracts for all your staff. If you have, like in Bangladesh, 3,000 people in the garment industry, they say that's just not enough. So we do need that fundamental change. So many things like that which are related, you know, beyond the general thing about exit need to be looked at very carefully, and the basic point is ease of doing business.
Certainly, certainly. Let's take the discussion forward now. Coming to you, Mr. Chinoy, you know, as far as you know, the picking up manufacturing is concerned, do you see some kind of a specific package coming in for certain industries maybe so that manufacturing can pick up?
So I think if you saw in the previous term of this government, they announced packages for textiles, and they also announced some package for leather. But while the focus on the previous government's tenure was on the ease of doing business, I think fundamentally there to either increase consumption within India or to increase competitiveness with our competitors overseas, we have to bring down the cost of doing business. So you touched upon infrastructure in the previous question, but we need to look at land, cost of labor, cost of power, the cost of capital. I mean, interest rates we possibly have the highest real interest rates anywhere in the world currently. So I think this focus should be on the reducing the cost of doing business within the country. The second thing that we need to look in the manufacturing, while we had a Make in India version 2, we need a Make in India version 2. We had Make in India version 1, we now need a Make in India version 2, which focuses on actually translating that and taking it from 16% and in 25% and focusing on the newer industries. If you're looking at textiles, for example, the world is moving to technical textiles. So can we focus on taking a leadership in the technical textiles field using the infrastructure that has been built for textiles? The other aspect is there are a lot of existing companies that are located in areas where they have reached the maximum capacity. And because of either environmental concerns or other concerns, even though they're willing to meet the environmental norms, they're unable to expand and expand for exports. So we need to actually look at how do we allow existing companies to grow to scale where they are located while meeting all the norms and yet being permitted to preferentially expand vis-a-vis the others. So I think this whole concept of enabling firms to grow, focusing on competitiveness and improving productivity in the ecosystem, and looking at other areas of intervention which will help people reduce the cost of, let's say, labor. For example, many of the leading garment companies, and this is an area where exports have diminished over the last few years, are located in urban centers. And the big challenge for them is low-cost worker housing. So can we look at creating an ecosystem that enables people to expand and to continue business where they're located, rather than insisting that they shift to a new area and create a whole system and cause a disruption in their manufacturing cycle. The other thing with which Mr. Virmani talked about earlier is there are many global value chains, right? I think how does India get into more of those global value chains and actually participate in them and therefore increase manufacturing capability and manufacturing presence within the country. So there are multiple things that needed to be done, one on the overall policy aspect and other on specific areas of different manufacturing sectors as we go forward.
Sure. So a multi-pronged approach needs to be used is what you're suggesting. 3-4 other points coming out as well. Improving the ecosystem, productivity, as well as, reducing cost and infrastructure is what you've spoken about. Adding to that, Shishir, what about compliance?
Yeah, that's the most important thing. I think now we have a very better situation. When we are talking about ease of doing business, there are a number of things which are falling under the purview of a state. So we have 16 state governments of the same party which has ruling at the central government. So earlier there used to be some approval from the center but not some approval from the state government. When you have parties in both places, I mean at the center as well as in the state, so that will really help the industry to take approval or permissions from various agencies. The other thing is, I think that there need to be a single window kind of system. The industry should not go from one place to other place just for seeking approval from one thing or the other thing and the other things. That will continue and that will really increase their costs. The compliance issue comes only because the approval process is so cumbersome and going from one window to other window. So that really force, I will say, not the prompting, I will say it forces the industry to take some other route. So if we make the process simpler, if we make a single window kind of approval, and if we also have a better coordination between center as well as the state, the industry will be in a better position to comply various norms.
Certainly. Okay, taking the discussion forward now. Dr. Virmani, have we missed the manufacturing bus? Is it too late now to make amends? Do we start looking at something new, maybe AI and so on and so forth?
So, if you had asked me this 2 years ago, it was pretty much looking like that. But because of the tariff war, which is also becoming a technology war now, well, it has been for some time, but from the US side it's now starting. So that gives us actually a once in a generation opportunity, and this is what I have been saying for the last year since it actually started, and another opportunity like this will not come. So I think it's very, very timely that we have a new government, and this is very timely you got this discussion. I think the government needs to grab it. They are aware of it. One has been tweeting about it, and occasionally Mr. Prabhu has taken note of what one has said. So I think they are on the job, but I think it needs a bigger thrust. So you know, at kind of the PMO level. On more specific, just a few specific things. So there is the opportunity. So we've discussed many things we've done.
But it's now or never is what
you
suggest.
It is really now or never on this kind of labor intensive, which is what we started with, which is this whole issue of jobs, employment. We haven't mentioned agriculture, we can come to that, but I want to mention 2 or 3 specific things. One is what he said, the center state coordination. I think given the digitization thrust of the government, and given that the like he said, the BJP is in power, I think they can probably push it in all the big states, because it will be easy at least to set up the system so that if state government wants to have it coordinated, they can do it, but the system has to be set up first. The second point, which is very important, is from the few people I talk to, small businesses, etc., there is a difficulty in just getting simple skilled labor. So this whole issue of skills and training, that whole skill development system doesn't seem to have worked as effectively. That's one of the weaknesses of NDA 2, which they'll have to pay attention to, because you know, large companies can train their people. It doesn't matter, they can spend 2 months, 6 months, hire somebody, train them, but the smaller people cannot do it. And as we just everybody knows that when you're talking about labor intensive, the smaller competitive private sector has really been the driver. So we need to help them in finding the right people, maybe help them, train them, and maybe focus some of our skill development efforts on that area.
I think that issue was seen and the government tried to address that issue as well by having a separate skill development ministry.
Right.
But you know what's come of it, Dr. Virmani?
Well, perhaps the FICCI
will
know.
He'll be the right person to answer. Let me take that question to him. In fact, you know, Mr. Chinoy, as far as skill development is concerned, your thoughts?
So, you know, I think if you're talking about the whole skill development ecosystem, the challenge in the medium and small industry about them unable to find people is not necessarily linked to the skill level. I think a lot of that there is the amount of wage that they're willing to pay, and nobody wants to work at that wage in that sector, and it's not attractive or not aspirational for them. So, you know, the really thought behind the whole thing about providing low-cost worker housing is because in the low and medium, in the small and medium industry, housing is a great challenge for those people who work there. And if we can actually reduce the cost of housing, that even then the wages that are going to be paid by the small and medium sector become attractive to the prospective employee. The other thing is that in the skills ecosystem currently, if anybody were to tell, let's say, this NSDC that, you know, we are looking for such type of people with such type of skill levels, the NSDC ecosystem can produce the people. But what actually happens from translating from them to be skilled and produced and then going into employment is the wage and location of employment. So if we can make and address the wage issue, and not necessarily by increasing wages, but by providing other kinds of support. Low-cost housing was one example. We can actually enable companies to give meals to them. In the current GST law, it is taxable. So if we make it a part of their employment contract, then it won't be taxable. So it is, we can actually address the skills issue there. But it is not just a skill issue and not related to the skills ministry alone. We have to look at the whole employment ecosystem in industry.
Certainly. Is manufacturing going to be a big employer? Can the, you know, it's been a big poll issue, at least, you know, it's raised quite a bit over the last 6 or 10 months. Can we see manufacturing providing those jobs in the near future, Shishir?
Because manufacturing is the only avenue where you have a job multiplier. If you talk about one direct employment, that produces almost 4 indirect employment. That's a very back of the envelope calculation. So manufacturing, we have to focus on that. And if I can remember, earlier the target was that to achieve 25% share in total GDP. It is now just 17%. So it's certainly now or a never kind of thing, and that tariff war has given a situation where we can have a multi-pronged approach to provide a kind of stimulus to the manufacturing. On the one hand, you have to talk about investment allowance. On the other hand, you have to talk about improving the labor laws. At the same time, you have to talk about the cross-border movement of labor from other part of the world to India, as well as from India to other part of the world. This is another area. And the fourth and the most important is that how various procedures can be simplified so that manufacturing or the manufacturers will feel ease to expand their business according to the need, and that will certainly create a job, because job is the most important thing. We must remember that 65% of our population is below the age of 35 years, and we are talking about demographic dividend. How we will achieve demographic dividend if sufficient number of job opportunities are not created?
Sure.
Let me address one other point, which is SEZs, but I want to link it to what has been said earlier and to show you a little bit of how complex this issue is. You know, in the large metropolitan areas, what he has just said is correct, because there is not enough housing, right? But that's not true. I have known people who have been pushed out of, let's say, the Delhi area, and who've gone to the neighboring villages. They can't find anybody even with the qualification. Qualification means just being able to sit in a thing and do simple work. They could not find employees for a manufacturing unit which moved out of here to Haryana, and Haryana is not a backward state. So one possible solution, I mean, I agree that in some areas it could be housing, but another aspect is the special economic zones which have been proposed, which don't seem to have been that effective in India as they have been in most of Southeast Asia. We compared the numbers from Southeast Asia. There the SEZs were, so there you can actually provide the housing, you can provide the training, you can do everything right in one place. So the broad point I take, but the issue is really, I think we all agreed, is multi-dimensional, and one has to kind of go through each of the sectors, each of the things. Yeah.
And you need to have a multi-pronged approach really to try and deal with this. Okay, quick closing comments from all my guests, starting first with you, Dilip Chinoy. Can we expect some kind of an impetus from the budget, maybe reduce the taxes as far as the middle class are concerned, so that consumption can go up and that in turn can help manufacturing?
If you're looking at the rollout of the action plan, of course, the first is the budget, like you suggested. And we're already hearing that they're looking at ways to put more money into the hands of the consumer. And you could expect certain taxation benefits to be extended to the people. But the effect of that will actually kick in a bit later. The second thing that they're talking about is re-looking at the corporate taxation. So looking at allowing the companies to be able to invest to manufacture for the future. So the budget will see some special focus on putting more money into the hands of both the individual and the corporate, but also look at maybe outlays in a certain segments that will promote domestic manufacturing, maybe in the defense sector or some other such sectors going forward. So you will see something immediately maybe in the budget in end June or early July. But most of the other initiatives that are required will come as a 100-day agenda or the agenda going forward. For example, the MSME bill will have to be reintroduced, and redefining MSMEs and doing a whole lot of stuff for MSMEs. The corporate law amendment. So that all will come sequentially going forward.
Right.
But I think the budget would increase infrastructure spending and would try and put some more money into the hands of individuals and corporates going forward.
Certainly. Talking about specific sectors, Shishir Sinha, the auto sector isn't doing too well. Growth has dropped significantly. Hiring also has come to a standstill. Are there any sectors that we need to focus on going forward?
Apart from automobile, you rightly mentioned about automobile. In fact, their capacity utilization have come down, and many of them have gone for a kind of production leave for 4 days to 7 days, and some places at 10 days. So the basic reason is that they are not finding consumer, they are not finding the customer for their product. So inventory is going up, so there is no other option but to curtail the production. I think the other sector which is which is equally important is the textile sector. We have a lot of opportunities, and we also need to understand that Bangladesh is moving much faster. So if we have to think about any particular sector, I believe it should be textile.
Okay, textile is going to be the focus area as far as you are concerned, is what you're suggesting. Quick closing comment from you, Dr. Virmani, on the way forward.
I would expect that the budget will really stick to the issue of macro balance, which is the weight between fiscal and monetary policy. And secondly, perhaps one is hopeful of they had promised in the last 5 years about corporate reform. So certainly one hopes to, one expects that would be completed, so to say. Beyond that, I agree with Mr. Chenoy that many of the other things will be done separately. And as far as specific sectors are concerned, I think it's very important, if we look at it in a reform context, you have to see where is it we want to get to, and then go on that path. I don't think it helps to go the opposite way. For example, many of us, including the former vice chairman of NITI, who is a trade expert, you remember him, he's my namesake, and we opposed the increase in tariffs which happened in the last 2 years, because we have seen in India, across the world, it does not help. It's a very temporary, short-term thing. It can save you for 6 months, but it doesn't help in the long run. We have seen it everywhere. So the point I'm making is that one has to look forward and say, okay, where do we want to go, and then take the steps in that direction. So whether it's a difficult issue like labor reform, you don't want to move backwards. Similarly, with any other reform, it just does not help to go in the wrong direction. But things can be done gradually over time, as long as you're clear where you're headed.
So have a vision and work towards that, is what you're suggesting. Okay, that's it on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.